What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Regenerative Mindset. It's your host, Miles Adams, and
Rye Seekins, right here.
we've got a great one for you today. Two really, really good videos. Rye, if you want to introduce those.
Sure. So we have a forest garden, 23-year-old forest garden video that takes us through a tour of this couple's beautiful garden that's a perennial. It stays around every year. And then we have a video telling the story of a monk who saved the last forest in one of my favorite YouTubers' villages in Thailand. The YouTuber's name is Jon Jondai, and I can't pronounce the monk's name, but it's a really it's a cool story about educating the community and building community through regenerative practices.
All right, you want to start with that one, or?
Sure. So this monk came to this village in Thailand, which is a tropical country. So it never freezes and plants grow a lot, and the rain comes in monsoon seasons. It doesn't rain for a lot of the year, and then it rains a lot for the other part of the year during the monsoon season. And so that's ripe weather for water harvesting that we've been talking about in the last couple episodes. So he taught the population about swales and planting trees to grow a healthy area. And he taught a lot about how community comes from this. The monk taught a lot about how community comes from working on the land together. So some of the things that really stuck out to me was the monk not only taught people how to build this forest, but also how to farm rice together. And he said this is where Jon Jondai, the guy who made the video, said he taught how to farm rice the old way instead of the new way. And the new way uses a lot of machines, so somebody can do it by themselves. But the old way, he called it a joy party, like happy party. And the old way is to get a lot of people together and to pull the rice. And people will sing songs and go eat afterwards. And he says it's so much different when there's a joy party farming versus just one person. Like he says, farming rice by yourself is terrible. It takes like long hours of labor, and like it's not very fun, and your feet are all wet and stuff. But when it's a joy party, the work goes really fast. You're hanging out with your family and friends. And the monk brought that practice back, and now people aren't paid directly for this. Like the joy party aren't paid like hourly. You know, people like get meals or like have friendships and stuff, but they're not paid like that. But when somebody misses, if they're busy and can't go to a joy party, now they say like, "Dang, I didn't get to pick rice with everyone." Like building. And this is so much better than the modern way, the new way that uses all these machines, which puts all these farmers in debt, which isolates them from their community, and they have to focus on making money, and it's like money is external to their community. But when they're farming in this old way, they're working with the people right next to them.
So I haven't really seen this video yet. Is there like an original problem that the village has to solve, or are they just trying to find a better way to do things?
Just trying to find a better way to do things. It's kind of like from the perspective of the monk who came in, the village had kind of lost its path, was kind of going in like the modern industrializing way, and for a lot of reasons, which I'm pretty in favor of, he doesn't think that's the right way to go. So he talks about how we can take care of the land, and how we might not do things as efficiently, but that's not what matters, and it's like the connection to the people and the connection to the land that matters. So it is kind of meandering in that effect, so it's harder to like pinpoint an exact goal on it. But I think it's the real highlight of this video for me is the community that comes from working together on the land. I think it's so land is inherently something we share, you know.
Yeah.
So building it up together is inspiring. That's what I really liked about this one.
Yeah, It sounds super cool. And kind of like how maybe efficiency isn't the only thing we should look for. Just like money isn't the only thing that we should look for. These people aren't getting paid to join the joy party. They're doing it for the joy of the party. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah. You want to take us to okay.
Does he just like basically just teach traditional rice farming practices?
Yeah, so the monk comes into town, he opens a temple, and the temple runs classes, and that's where he taught the traditional rice farming practices. But he also turned the whole temple's ground into a beautiful forest.
Oh wow!
And showed those. So it was kind of a demonstration site to the villagers who would come by, and he'd be like, "Check this out! Look what we can do to this land. You know, make it like really, really fruitful." And a lot of these people's economy is based off of like the land that they live on. You know, they have livestock, and that livestock needs to graze, and a lot of them are in touch with like the medicinal benefits that the land can provide. So when this guy builds this temple and shows the way that we can take care of the land and make it really fruitful, it kind of brings that inspiration to the village. So I think yeah.
So are they kind of skeptical at first, or do they recognize the benefits kind of right away?
The way that it's shown in Jon Jondai's video, they recognize the benefits all the way. And Jon Jondai kind of carries on this guy's legacy. Like he has a self-sufficiency center in the same village. Like Jon Jondai was inspired by this guy. Which another part of all this is that, you know, these teachings can be passed on and continue to inspire down the line and like just continue that cycle of growth.
And the final question, is there like an economic benefit to the people, or is it purely community? Or is there kind of like a kind of mixed thing where like it might not be directly economically beneficial, but it kind of helps almost develop a barter economy or
yeah. And so kind of what I was saying when I was like, so a lot of agriculture, right? People make their money off of agriculture. That's like growing food and selling it. And Jon Jondai talks a lot about how like Western companies came in, like companies like Monsanto and their equivalents came in and sold seeds to farmers and sold fertilizers to farmers. And then John Deere comes in and sells tractors to farmers and also finances their tractors. So everybody gets in debt and nobody can farm their own seeds anymore.
Oh, okay.
And that, you know, kind of puts them in slavery is too strong of a word for it, but like they're kind of held down by these like corporate entities. And it's just like the self-sufficiency from knowing about how the land works and being able to use it in these ways provides that economic benefit. And I think it promotes like trade within the village as opposed to like, you know, growing something, selling your food to like the next village over and then sending that money off to Monsanto, right?
Exactly.
But it's like keeping it in the community.
Oh, I really like that. Yeah, just kind of be not be dependent on these fertilizers and these corporations, and kind of just be able to fully kind of own your own land.
Yes.
And it not even own your own land, but just be able to work almost the community's land.
Yeah, and that's like I've been really enjoying the understanding of power recently. There's two kinds of power in this setup. There's power over, which is kind of a mean power. Like if I have power over you, I can tell you to do whatever I want. Like go get me a glass of water or something. It's like I have power over, and then like I can't both have power over you and you have power over me. Like it doesn't work like that. Power over is a finite resource. There's like a little pie of it, right? But but then there's like power to, and power with, and that's an infinite pie. It means like when people have better understandings of the land and they have the power to harvest rainwater and they have the power to use these regenerative practices, it's like it doesn't take from anyone. That knowledge like breeds new power, and when they have the power to take care of themselves and power to build that family, like it doesn't steal from anyone. It just boosts people up.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really, really great connection, because you can kind of see these power structures in a lot of things throughout the world. And
Absolutely.
you can see kind of the difference in product and quality of life when people are operating with power to or power over.
Yeah. Even
Because
connected.
I think even as like someone with power over, you have a fear that you can lose that power. You have to keep
Good point.
obtaining power over someone, and you're kind of in a not very secure situation where if you lose that power over someone, you have no power yourself.
Yeah. And it gets into people's heads too. Like when, like in the Monsanto example, where they're selling seeds and they're heavily in debt to these foreign entities and not able to grow their own seeds because Monsanto sells seeds that like don't refertilize, right? So you have to like keep buying new seeds, or it's illegal to use their seeds again. Like it gets into your head that you're like below them, and I think that's not a place we want to put people, you know.
No, not at all. And I think I like the idea of being self-sufficient within a community. Being self-sufficient doesn't mean you have to do it yourself. It means you kind of you don't need anyone's permission.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of gets mixed up a lot too. People think I'm independent, I have to do everything by myself. When in reality, you can still be independent and ask for help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, want to tell us about the food forest?
All right, yeah, this is my video. The 23-year-old food forest in, I think it was either New Zealand or Australia. Pretty sure New Zealand. And so kind of a general overview. Most importantly, this guy calls his garden a forest garden, which he thinks is a really important, like, kind of difference between like a regular traditional garden. And he describes that difference as, he says, the difference in a forest garden and a traditional vegetable garden has a lot to do with how you think, and how you view your own power. Kind of going back to what we were talking about. A traditional vegetable garden is thinking you have kind of power almost over nature and to control it, versus a forest garden is accepting the wildness of nature and kind of the not necessarily super organized, super categorized, just kind of accepting the gray area, and that things will be not perfect all the time.
Right. So would that be like, instead of seeing your rows of carrots, you got like a banana tree and some blackberries under it?
Yeah. So getting kind of more practical, a forest garden is organized vertically versus horizontally. And kind of his goal with his forest garden is as much biodiversity as possible. And so when I say it's organized vertically, he organizes his garden by layers rather than where he plants things. So at the top layer, he has his native trees, which were there before he even got there, which are just like kind of big, tall trees that grow naturally in New Zealand, cabbage trees and stuff like that. Below that, he has his fruit trees slash production trees, apples, pears, peaches, stuff like that. The next layer below that is bushes and shrubs, blackberry bushes, and all types of different shrubs. Below that, you have herbs and ground plants. And then finally, he has his bulbs and root vegetables. And kind of tying these layers together, he has a network of vines and kind of crawling plants that work throughout the different layers. And so basically, within each layer, he wants as much biodiversity and almost as much kind of plant density as possible. So when you think of like a horizontally organized garden, you know, you have one plant here, and then like 2 feet later you have another plant. And so there you can really see what you have, and you're able to kind of watch it and kind of control what goes on around it. Versus here, he has just plants planted randomly. And kind of, he wants as many as possible. He has a 480 total species of plants that they know of. And 120 different fruit trees. So that just kind of shows the diversity within the layers. And some people might think that with all these plants, some will drown out other plants, and there's too much competition for each species to really thrive.
Right, like a weed would steal nutrients from another plant or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. Or even light. Right. Some plants might not get light because another grows faster. And he really doesn't agree with this. He actually says that each plant use and deposit different nutrients. So they're actually mutually beneficial versus competitive. So if you plant tomatoes and split peas together, they actually would do better than planted just tomatoes and then on another row just split peas, because these nutrients, the split pea uses what the tomato puts into the ground, and the tomato uses what the split pea puts. And the great thing about this wildness in his garden is that he has very little plant management. He doesn't have to weed. He doesn't have to mow a lawn. He doesn't have to like watch things very precisely and make sure everything is going perfectly. In fact, the only real management that he talks about is sometimes the ground cover plants. He has this one species that might grow a little bit too fast, so when he's walking in his garden, he just steps on it. And that actually slows down the growth enough to allow the other ground cover plants to come in and thrive as well. I think, and as he's describing the garden, he talks about more of a difference in, while there is a big difference in practices, he really focuses on a difference in mindset. And that mindset is accepting the wildness, accepting the imperfections, and thinking of those as potential benefits rather than problems. He says that he quickly realized that he was just a bit player in Mother Nature's game. So instead of trying to change Mother Nature to fit his needs, he's changing his needs in order to fit in with Mother Nature. And he talks a lot about this through diet. Instead of growing like traditional lettuces and stuff like that, he'll eat some plants that are just as edible, just kind of lesser known. They talk about nettle soup and a bunch of different things. So that's kind of the mindset, is how can you think about this differently in order to fix the problem, in order for the problem to not be a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's really nice. And it's a great way to look at challenges, because rather than an obstacle, it can be a benefit.
Yeah. He said one thing in the video about he saw what he thought might be a problem. But instead of like getting out his chainsaw to like take out this branch with the worms on it, instead he takes time to look at and see what's going on, and then see like how he can actually use this new occurrence of these worms instead of just trying to fight them back.
Yeah, I really like that. He says often when he sees a problem, it'll make it worse by going in immediately and trying to stop whatever's happening from happening. Says it's better to take a step back, actually truly understand what's happening, and then proceed from there.
Yeah. It reminds me of something that happened in my garden last year. I was growing some cucumber plants, and these little tiny black bugs started showing up on the bottom side of them. And I was like, oof. And my first thought was like pull off all these leaves that had the black bugs on them. But I decided not to, kind of see where it took everything. And I ended up discovering they were aphids, a kind of aphid, and they were kind of draining the fluid out of these cucumber leaves, so the cucumber leaves would shrivel up a lot. And I lost a lot of cucumber leaves, but never any whole plants. And then after a couple weeks of them being there, some ladybugs moved in and managed the population, and that's so much better than me just going out there every day and picking off these leaves.
Yeah, because then you just got to pick off more the next day.
Yeah, and
the ladybugs might never come in.
Yeah. And now those ladybugs do so much more too. You know, they add all this beauty to the garden, and they like pollinate and take care of other little insects. It's like my problem with those bugs became the solution to wanting ladybugs. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a perfect example. I think that's great. And kind of with this mindset of your problems might actually be your solutions, he builds a great community of insects and animals that kind of self-regulate as well as regulating his garden. He says the majority of his garden management is done by birds who naturally nest in the trees that he capped on the property. And then his herbs attract pests, which attract like predatory bugs like ladybugs, and then also attract pollinators. He has another example of there was a creek running through his property, and instead of trying to straighten the creek into a drain or make it a nice pretty brook, he kind of left it natural with the leaves and kind of all the twists and turns, and these fish swim up the creek and reproduce on his property. And so he's just, by taking a step back and leaving things, he's creating a community bigger than just humans and just himself, that all use the land but also take care of it because they use it, you know? And I think that's the real lesson of this video is these natural occurrences, while they may use your land or land that you consider to be yours, it's not your land. It was originally their land, and because they use it, they will take care of it because they want to use it again. You know?
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They
I really
support
like this
everything.
video.
Yes.
He's a cool old dude. Yeah, and on top of that, they've built a human community with. They have a little center in the town where they can sell like naturally made products. Some of which come from their property. Others come from they have naturally made soaps and beeswax from neighbors and stuff like that. So where if maybe the forest garden isn't your thing, and that's totally fine. You can still benefit from it while at the same time helping continue it on, even if you don't want to get out there and actually do it.
Totally.
Yeah.
It makes me think of so many different things. First, on that last point of like how you can be involved even if you don't want to do this garden, or maybe you don't feel like you can handle that wildness right now. You know, it's like you can still get products from those sources. You can support and educate about those things.
Exactly.
And now kind of back on the wildness thing and how it's like kind of, I kind of think of it through this, it makes me think of this framework like, we often try to anticipate everything that's like everything that could happen and all of our like potential reactions to it. But like we're not that smart. We can't do this like super crazy complex system like a forest is, you know? But so we reduce it to something we can understand, which is these like rows of garden beds, where it's like plant next to plant next to plant, and it's like, and in there we can be like, okay, if this happens, I'll do this, and like I understand how big everything will grow and all the size constraints they need, and I'll grow all these perfect broccoli plants right next to each other, right? But I really think we can embrace our potential of like adapting and like beyond rational. It's like beyond having to know everything and applying logic to everything, but just like being out there and appreciating and like allowing opportunities for these natural things to happen. I feel like it applies in so many other places too. Like people think you have to. I've been thinking about it in learning recently. Is it like you have to learn with a direction? Like you have to know, okay, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and like that's how you have to be taught. But I don't think that's the case. I think for me, I can just, you know, maybe a simpler example would be like watching a TV show. Like you need to watch a TV show from like straight to finish, from like start to finish to get all the characters and everything. And you might miss stuff, but like we're capable of putting things together, like irrespective of the time that we learned them. You know, if I learned step 3 first and then got step 1 and then like I could move them all together, I could like, our brains are incredible how they can merge these complex systems into one thing, one understanding. And I think we should remember our capability to, that we don't need such an organized linear path, you know, that we can comprehend these complexities and these like crazy interwoven paths. And that's actually who we are. And that we're actually not like, and it applies in our brains too. We're not just one like linear conscious stream of thought. We're so many different thoughts that move together and like,
I think we have the tendency to want to make everything logical and kind of almost predictable.
Right.
But we have to remember that evolution, the driving force behind the existence of humanity, is based off random mutations in our genetics. That's how things work. Not everything is cut and dry logical. It's just this happens. Does it do well or does it not? It's not necessarily about how things change. It's how the changes kind of affect things.
Yes, and I think it's so cool that like the evolution, the thing that's evolving doesn't really have to know why something worked. It can just work. Like I love this example of like seeds that learned how to fly. I might have told this one before, but a little I was walking through the creek near my house, and there's I took off an American trumpet vine seed pod and opened it up, and there was these pretty like flat seeds. You know, they were about this long and like super duper thin. That's like about an inch long, and I threw some up in the air, and they floated along. They caught the wind drafts, and it's like, okay, so at one point they were probably a normal seed. And then they started flattening out, and that started like working more and more, right? So they ended up evolving to be these like fluttering seeds. Now, do they understand the physics of flight? No, but were they able to grow things? Yes. So it's like you don't have to understand everything to use everything. So I think that's another point for why we don't need logic as much as we might think we do, sort of.
I think that's a great point. These seeds don't understand the physics of air resistance and wind foils and stuff like that. They just float, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this can be applied socially as well.
100%.
You know, you want to create a system for having the right reactions and the right responses. But sometimes you just gotta say what the first thing that pops to your mind. And sometimes that's the most genuine thing you can do. Rather than abiding by all these kind of social rules. And they're in place for a reason, but at the same time, if you feel as if you need to break that, you feel like that for a reason also.
Right. And that that increased genuineness can bring deeper connection, can bring like more communication.
Because our brains aren't logical. Like, I don't think emotions definitely aren't logical.
For sure.
Yeah. But you kind of sometimes just have to accept that illogicality, but say, I don't care. This is how I feel. And you still have to be able to communicate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is like in the social, and then kind of bringing it to like the internal emotional. It's like, so often I'm like kind of stuck with like, why am I feeling this? Where's it coming from? Or like trying to figure it out, or even being like, wait, I'm sad. I'm not supposed to be sad. I don't want to be sad. And then I feel like doubly bad. I feel like, wait, I'm sad, and then I'm not being happy. So this is terrible, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like that also applies in the same form of like logical maximization of time, and then also like this presumption that emotions are logical. And that there's so much power in accepting the world and trying to deal with it in this kind of free-flowing, wild way.
I totally agree.
And I feel like all this conversation is particularly salient in the culture we are in now. Perhaps the most rational human culture ever developed, right? Western rationality.
Yeah, that's how we think of it, but at the same time, if we were to go back 1,000 years and show someone our current society, they would not at all think it's rational. It's relative.
Perhaps. But I'm trying to say, like, we support logic. Like, we hold logic to such a high standard in our culture in a way that hasn't always been historically true. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we think kind of everything can be explained and understood by science, and that science, therefore, is rational. But we have to realize that science is kind of just the observation of our natural world, which is inherently irrational.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a problem, is we want everything to be rational, but it never will. And I like what you're talking about, acceptance. It's just accepting that things are how they are, and how can I go from here?
Yeah. Your point about science reminds me of something I read in The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. Super good book, by the way.
Yeah.
But he was kind of talking about the limitations of science, and like particularly with this forest thing. So the scientific method is like you create an experiment, you isolate one variable between two different versions, and you see what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then then you can draw a conclusion about the influence of this one variable.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's very applicable, and clearly it's been able to build us rockets and beautiful things like that. But I think it fails particularly in complex systems. For example, like this guy's forest garden, you'd have to do like there's not enough time in the world to do enough science experiments to explain why having these 7 layers of different kinds of plants is the most productive and like sustainable version of things. You have to do so much science, so many tiny experiments, because there's so many variables. There's millions of variables. Like, did the porcupine walk through? How many porcupines are in this, like, are in his food forest, right? It's like,
where did they step? Where did they poop? All that. There's
right. So the only thing,
infinite variables, and you can go crazy trying to think them all.
Right. So it's outside of like the realm of science to understand all the way. In a way where like that straight row vegetable garden, and even that like growing tomatoes and split peas next together, you could create an experiment for that, but you couldn't create an experiment for like 10 plant guilds combined with like 5 animal species that walk through there, right? Like you can't vary every single one of those and say like this is the perfect combination. So I guess I think it's important for us to realize that like science has limitations.
I agree. It's not all knowing. It is a useful tool to help us understand things.
Absolutely.
I 100% agree, and it has brought some awesome stuff like rocket ships, like you said, and modern medicine. But at the same time, it's not a one-stop shop. Yeah,
and
I fully agree.
It's so cool to see how that applied in this realm with the food forests.
I agree, 100%. And right. I think just real quick before we end off,
for sure,
this dude, his real strength is not in his knowledge of plants, which is great. It's not in his management of it's not in his ability to create a perfect system. It's his ability to accept an imperfect system. And accept that it will always be imperfect, but you can still greatly benefit from something that's not completely maximized for efficiency or production or just cost versus like income,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He's not too stressed about it, he's relaxed.
Yes.
I think that's great. That's something I find myself struggling with as I get older, is just being stressed about what am I going to do, all that stuff.
Am I making the most of my time?
Exactly. Sometimes you need to step back and say, what do I want to do?
Yeah. Man, I could just keep going for a minute on
me too.
That kind of the like, what am I going to do with my time? What's the best thing I can be doing? I think that's influenced by like the popularity of capitalism, and how that gets in our heads and our culture too. It's like, well, should I be a productive unit right now, a productive economic source?
Exactly.
But I really want to go after this idea of perfection. So the argument I'm going to try to push is like, perfection is totally made up. It doesn't exist. And it's like it's a false conceit. So first, let's talk about nature, and like, is there a perfect tree?
No.
I think, so I agree. But it's like, okay, if you try to, when I was first working through this, I was like, okay, what might a perfect tree be? Is it like a tree in this void that always got all the nutrients it could have ever used? and then we grow this nice base and this full like circular round treetop, and you're like, okay, that's pretty nice, you know, maybe that's like like what you might think of as a tree, but that might be the perfect tree for that environment. But isn't the weird funky tree that had a branch fall off and like had to squiggle up this way to get this last bit of sunlight the perfect tree for that spot? Would that other tree work there? No, it would be it totally wouldn't fit. It would be like against the rest of the ecosystem. So I think like if perfect exists, like every tree is already perfect for where it is.
I agree. And I think if we look at it from an ecosystem perspective, what's the perfect ecosystem?
Right.
There are
no worries.
Inherent imperfections in a perfect ecosystem. Like things are gonna die, and that is part of the ecosystem. So if your goal is no death, you can't have an ecosystem. If you can't grow without death, and I think it's a good ending point. Is kind of everything is perfect for itself.
Yes.
And that these things happen, and they might not be ideal, but they're what happens, and it's just a part of the natural order of things, and that imperfection itself is kind of perfect.
Yes. Good. I liked it. It would just bring me to the next. It's like, if we say that everything's already perfect, then like, what are we doing? And like, aren't we trying to go to a further perfect, or maybe we're not trying to?
I think we're just trying to grow.
And it's as perfect now as it will be then.
I agree. And I feel like the only thing we can do by trying to make it perfect is maybe mess it up a little bit, but also that mess up is a learning experience. And it's might not actually be a mistake. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there will always be problems, and our goal can't be to have a life with no problems. Just that's the basic. Because when you fix one problem, a different one will appear. It's better to change your mindset and how you look at the original problem, I think. And that's what this guy does in the video.
Great connection. Cool way to bring it around. Okay. Thanks for joining us on the Regenerative Mindset.
Yeah. Kind of went all over the place at the end there, but that's part of our perfect imperfection.
Absolutely. Keep being perfect, y'all.